So far I understand there has not been major changes, in the budget that was earlier presented during Oli's government. Minor adjustments have been made. That you can figure out when you sincerely go through the white paper that this current finance minister had brought out. There are some projects, worth even 8 to 10 billion Nepali rupees at a time when cumulative loss in the overall budget is so high, budget deficit is so high, both domestic and external debt servicing liability is so high, it exceeds 40% of the GDP. So each and every Nepali bears the burden of almost 56,000 Nepali rupees as a debt the moment they are born, So without doing any feasibility study, without distributing any compensation to the land, couple of projects were there, which was basically based on off budgetary expenses. When the government does that, they don't comply with the existing rules, regulations, norms of the policies. So these kind of projects, I guess, have been now eliminated. Many of such budgetary adjustment do not get reflected in the red book, so it's very difficult. It will be too early right now to exactly tell you the amount, but in general, based on our dialogue, even with the minister, chief economic advisor of the Ministry of Finance, and other relevant people at the ministry, going through media reports and all, what I would see now at the moment is some not very much demand-based projects, they have been eliminated. That's it. Rest, you cannot avoid the requirement for your recurrent expenses. There are a couple of projects, like for instance, Budi Gandaki project. Its feasibility study was done almost. Some projects. You already have completed compensation, line compensation to the local people, but they are just there. The government, several governments came into the power, they just don't know what kind of model they will be using in the proposed project. So our concern is, it's now high time. Don't take it as a prestige issue, If in the name of National Pride project, these projects are not working at all. Budgetary allocation each year in the annual budget is not justifiable, Hoarding the liquidity, if you don't roll it out, then there is no question that you will be increasing the percentage share of capital expenditure, annual expenditure, and then you can increase the household income. If you could increase your strength to increase capital expenditure, then we can expect fair amount of money being complemented to each and every households. So when there is a increment in household income, automatically consumer spending will be increased. So here comes the question of aggregate demand and aggregate supply, and this is the way how you make the economy resilient and how you can recover from our problems. So to conclude to what you asked, I don't think that the current budget has done a major homework to bring about major changes in the structure, in the allocation of resources. Only those projects which were not very much relevant, and I guess people at large, except few people who represent that particular constituency, but it will be very difficult. Where from you get the money? Gone are the days for free lunch. Even direct foreign investment is in declining trend. If you look at the figure in 2019, from 85 million US dollars, it has dramatically come down. So I told you, debt servicing liability has been increasing. So the government should be pretty much particular about how to manage debt servicing liability, because we find the problem in our currency devaluation. We are fortunate enough, we still have a fixed exchange rate. So if the Indian economy recovers, this year IMF, ADB, international financial institutions have estimated the growth rate in India a bit higher than the growth rate even in mainland China. So as soon as there is a high growth in India, we have a trickle down effect. Nepal would automatically get benefit because we have a fixed rate regime. For a long run, we cannot think on that line either. There has to be a gradual adjustments. So it should be a gradual process. Gradually, you try to float your money in the open market, and that way you can sustain. But what to do? We don't have any production. Tourism sector is gone. There has been exceptionally high expenditure incurred in the health sector. Economy has been slowing down. V-shaped recovery is a dream project. It's not very possible, at least for the next 2 to 3 years. So whosoever comes here in the power, they should look into the 3 years perspective for our budget. The rolling budget. Even in the highly developed countries during the Southeast Asian currency crisis of 1997 and 2008 global financial crisis, it took almost 1.5 years for shaping up employment regime in developed countries. So in Nepal, I imagine if things go better way, if we could bring about political certainty, not much frequent changes in the government, in the ruling government, and frequent transfer of the project chiefs, then in that case I think 3 years period is fairly reasonable period. We can make an adjustment. We are victimized by two fronts now: externalities and domestic problem. Domestic problem is largely because of the political uncertainty and non-compliance of the rules and regulations. External factors is globally FDI is declining. Globally, foreign aid component in the overall budget is declining. In our annual budget, more than 23% of the annual budget depends on the external assistance. But the capacity to use that money is being deteriorated. That's the tragedy. Yeah, there are a lot of things that we should really consider in increasing capital expenditure. Many of the donor community were pretty much worried about this. And then what they really did was they brought about one consolidated policy to help Nepal in a standard operational procedure. This is completed actually. Based on that procedure, if you could spend money earmarked in the budget, there could be some hope in increasing capital expenditure. Now, what has been happening in this country is there has been complaint in the media. Media reporting has been arising interest to many people in current years. Like 20% mobilization fund undertaken by the contractors have been used elsewhere. If that's true, if that's the case, this is not required. This is not very desirable sort of event. So, in many projects we have seen, I have a long list of projects. Many projects there has not been any sort of environmental impact assessment, and there has not been any feasibility study, but budget has been earmarked because of the political pressure. Time overrun, cost overrun is another problem. When you cannot finish the ongoing projects on time, let us take the case of Melamchi. Initially we thought it shouldn't exceed more than 46 billion Nepali rupees, but now it has exceeded 80 billion Nepali rupees. It was merely 4 to 6 years delayed execution of that particular project. So when there is a time overrun in most of the Nepal's very important projects, there is a cost overrun. The kind of cost overrun we have at the moment is not even comparable in South Asian countries. We have more than 250 P1, P2 projects, and how far we have been successful to accomplish those projects. You earmark fund every year, and then next year, because of the hike in the price, because of the hike in the construction materials, the cost overshoots the original estimates. So this is how we have been victimized. So we have almost 22 national pride project, more than 241 P1 P2 projects, and there are it surprises me very much when I really think like in those projects where in Nepali we call it Akhtiyari. Authority has already been given, the CIA would not come behind them, but still that money is not spent because of the misunderstanding either between the secretary and minister or between the minister and contractor, or there has been frequent transfer in high paying projects. Although we have public service rules and regulations, but ruling government usually they do not comply with those rules and regulations. So frequent transfer of high officials, number one. Projects with full authority, money has not been spent, that's another problem. And there are too many projects on the line, all kind of projects, priority one projects. You have to downsize P1 and P2 projects in a special situation. The biggest question this country faces now is how to balance between human life, saving human life, and economic recovery. To do this, you have to make some kind of compromises. Even in national pride projects, there are many projects lying on for last several decades. They have not been doing anything good to create employment opportunities, to increase the income of the people, to create demand, for the investment. They are just there. So, whosoever comes, if the powerful minister holds that sort of portfolio, he convinces the finance minister to earmark that particular fund, and if needed, they will even go higher than what was originally estimated. So this is the tragedy, development tragedy. So number one, we should minimize, we should downsize the number of so-called national pride projects and P1, P2 projects. Number two, those people who after even getting the full authority to use the money, they have failed to do that, they should be penalized. Number three, standard operational procedure, manual sort of thing, that has been developed on the basis of consensus among different funding institutions in this country together with the government. So that has to be implemented. Where there was a SAARC summit couple of years ago in Nepal, I was also in the committee. So what we decided that there are 2 months left for doing a lot of things. Indian Prime Minister wanted a bulletproof car. Pakistan Prime Minister wanted to have a bulletproof car. Ultimately they brought their own. That's different thing. But significant amount of money had to be earmarked to accomplish SARC. So there was sort of fast track system developed. You spend the money based on the need and as endorsed by the cabinet, and there is no question that CIA would come and get hold of you. So you were safe from the CIA's tension. So maybe in some of the national pride projects which are extremely important, but what our failure is, we have until now not done any good homework to see what is the multiplier effect of the ongoing projects, how much money you spend and how much output you get. What is the internal rate of return? Globally, in any project, you say it's good project, you have 8 to 12% internal rate of return. In Nepal's key projects, some people have done on their own some homework, some exercise. In some micro hydro projects, even the internal rate of return is much more higher than the global average. This is very good. So we should learn some lessons. We spend billions of rupees in the name of capital expenditure, in the name of national priority projects, in the name of P1 and P2 projects, where fund is 100% guaranteed. There is no question about the fund, inaccessible of the fund. It is accessible, but we don't try to find out what kind of multiplier effect has this project created in the economy, so that there has been increment in the income, increment in employment, etc., etc. And what kind of internal rate of return? If you spend 1 billion rupees, for any project, that project, there has to be a growth of GDP by 1 billion. So but there is no response at all. Oftentimes I tell my friends, my colleagues, media, that there is a structural rigidities in Nepal's economy. For instance, there has been some years, where we have been quite successful to reduce the poverty, but reduction of the poverty would not mean, would not mean to decrease income inequality. There has been growth. For 3 consecutive years in this country before the earthquake of 2015, we had maintained 7% growth. The growth had nothing to do to create employment opportunities. We have a world-class monetary policy in Nepal, but monetary policy fails to contain inflation. See, you increase salary, you increase wage rate, but this doesn't show any symptom in increasing productivity. So salary hike and high wage rate is not responsive to increase productivity. Poverty reduction is inelastic to income inequality. Growth cannot create employment opportunities. Monetary policy cannot contain inflation. So what the hell is happening in our economy? So we have to try to break this vicious circle. Why standard economic understanding, microeconomic understanding has failed in Nepal? Why growth has miserably failed to create employment opportunities? Why poverty alleviation cannot reduce income inequality? Why monetary policy cannot give relief to the people in consumption goods? These are the things that we need to look into. So as I told you, we have not done any homework in multiplier effect. We have done nothing to find out internal rate of return. If we do that homework, and then there is some hope that based on the benefit cost analysis, you would precisely know what are the most prioritized sector in this country and what level of budgetary allocation is required and what kind of special policy changes required. You do that on the basis of your homework. So, those people who do research are a hated person in our political regime, that is the problem. National Planning Commission, yes, National Planning Commission gives you the threshold that this year's budget should not exceed X amount of money. But because of the political pressure and host of other externalities, the Ministry of Finance prepares the budget without the prior consent of the NPC, or if they have a consent, they represent the same political party. That is the problem. Politics has overshadowed significant economic regime in this country. This is our tragedy. Actually, we learned a very good lesson during the COVID-19. We accepted wholeheartedly. It was a time when the central bank's role, if you look at Central Bank, Nepal Rashtra Bank Act 1992, their activities were very much limited. Their role was simply to contain the inflation, But now what has happened? Government goes for expansionary fiscal policy. This budget, current budget, and before that also, what we saw based on expansionary fiscal policy, because you earmark money in several projects. You find like we need to do this. You spend more money than what you expected initially in the health expenditure. Percentage growth has been dramatically increased. We have been receiving loans, we have been receiving grants, in the health sector. Tourism sector is just gone. So, if you do not rehabilitate ongoing tourism sector, which was contributing significantly to the national GDP, it was almost sometimes 7 to 8% out of the total GDP. Now, these sectors have gone already. So, economic stress is there, health problem is escalating, and developing health infrastructures and for the treatment, for the construction, for the purchase of the required medical appliances, you need more and more money. So, you are compelled to go for the expansionary fiscal policy. So, if this happens, there has to be some mechanism so that you can guarantee the people that you will be well fed 2 times a day. You will get 2200 calorie intake. Because of the expansionary fiscal policy, you would not lose your capacity totally to spend, So, to do that, now there is a central bank behind you. So, central bank expects actually to be a conservative regulatory institution, controls everywhere, money supply. But now what it's doing frequently, they have been bringing about changes very frequently, When there is a liquidity crunch, they use like for instance repo. When there is excess of liquidity, not to create inflationary pressure in the market, they go for reverse repo. So you mop up the liquidity when there is excess liquidity in the market. You provide concessional, you provide loan to the commercial banks in concessional interests. So, lot of instruments, monetary instruments have been prepared lately to reconcile with the expansionary fiscal policy. So, this monetary policy that we have at the moment is accommodative monetary policy. Our fiscal policy is expansionary fiscal policy. So, unless they unite, unless they work together, economy will suffer. There will be collapse. So similarly, National Planning Commission, Ministry of Finance, and Central Bank. That has been, we have been experiencing that. This finance minister would try his level best to reflect some of the areas of concern based on their manifesto of their political party. And some people from Nepali Congress, for instance, they would like to bring about some changes. They do have experts, when they were in the opposition, they had a shadow foreign minister, they had a shadow finance minister, they do have, all the parties do have their own sort of cadres, But in the coalition culture, you unite, and I don't see much problem now, because they cannot survive by themselves, they need the support of coalition partners. So all the coalition partners who constitute the ruling government at the moment, they must compromise on some fundamental issues. This is the question of their survival. And the problem is, the coordination. We recommend, for instance, potential investors to Nepal. There is no one single, one window sort of, institution based on the Nepal's mission. If they welcome them here in Kathmandu and in other states now, because in principle, in theory, there has been decentralization, but there are a couple of dozens of policies that needs to be changed, to decentralize in real sense. Until now, what we see that this country is a unitary form of government. Still, it has been centralized, not decentralized in real sense, So there are a lot of restrictions imposed on the states. But to make our discussion simple, based on the recommendation of the ambassadors or consular general of Nepal, living and working for Nepal in different countries, if they make recommendations to potential investors in Nepal on their desired area which falls under our priority sectors, there has to be some mechanism to take care of them and listen to them. Now what they complain when they come back to foreign countries, their own countries. For instance, when I am in Colombo, I recommend couple of persons. They came here, they discussed, but they didn't find the real authority who could make some significant decisions. Everybody recommends every other institution or individual. So they were running around, they wasted their time, they came back. And on the basis of our recommendation, they came here to attend the summit, for instance. You may be surprised to know this. One of the guy, I know his name also, he is very reputed industrialist. By profession, he is an engineer, and he was that time the chairman. So what I was telling you was, they came over here to attend the summit. It was a couple of years ago, though, not at the time of this current government. And then they committed $5 million worth of investment in Nepal's hydropower and couple of other priority sectors, like establishing windmill, things like that. And then when they went back to Sri Lanka, they found out in the written document they had done $500 million. So they were expecting $500 million from that particular industrialist, investor. So you commit $5 million worth of investment in Nepal, but you find in Nepal's document $500 million. How come that's possible? So he told me, Professor Pyakuryal, I would run back. I'm back from my interest, so no more interested in making investment in Nepal. So there has to be, if that still remains in our document, official document, we should amend that and let the potential investor know. Right? Let the potential investor know that we have changed this. So number one, finding out right people back home is very difficult. No one cares. And you are talking about economic diplomacy. There has been some budgetary allocation in promoting trade, facilitating trade, in the name of economic diplomacy, in encouraging investments. We organize some seminars, we organize some brainstorming workshops, but not much response based on the deliberations. Every month the ambassadors from different countries must report to the Ministry of Finance about socio-political, economic developments in the assigned country. You do have ambassadors report, monthly report, piled up at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But until now, for 2 years time period, we had more than 22 sort of reports. I had clubbed in couple of reports, 2 months report in 1 month, because not much development had been done. But I trust 20 to 22 different reports had been submitted, but unfortunately I didn't get response to any of that report, what we reported back home. So this is a tragedy. This is the way how our bureaucracy runs. So we have to change that. This government, I suggest this government, I request to this government, we are very knowledgeable and very educated foreign minister at the moment, he should bring about major changes, major changes, at least at the policy level, so that whosoever comes next time will follow that policy. So we need some major policy changes in foreign relations. International process is being handled by this country in the past, but this MCC, sometimes I really get wonder why it became so much controversial. The more you delay the decision, the more complications you invite. There has been couple of issues in the agreement. Many countries who backed out had first discussed about those issues. So we have lost our credibility. The MCC from headquarters from Washington DC have had discussed in the past with 4 different prime ministers. Preliminary work had already been completed before the BRI was established in 2012. In 2017, it was agreed. So, I also had an opportunity to meet with the visiting, diplomats from US, high-ranking officials, couple of times with this ambassador, and what they said is, bringing about changes in already completed agreement is not possible. If Nepal just doesn't like it, they can back out, right? If there are some important issues that Nepal thinks US government should consider, then there is some hope, but we cannot guarantee. Some addendum, something like that, 1 to 2 pages in your concerns, that might be in different way addressed. So there is some possibility for bringing about minor changes, but this would have happened if we would have tabled the bill. Oli's government had already registered MCC compact at the parliament. So the responsibility of this government is to table the bill, so that have an open discussion and give enough time to the parliamentarians. They will discuss. If majority of the people endorse it, that's done. If they don't, if you fail, then we have to back out. But the implications, as you shared, there are a lot of implications. As you are aware, there is a Nepal Development Forum comprised of several donor countries and international financial institutions. World Bank alone handles more than 80% of the total external assistance for Nepal. So, World Bank's analysis, World Bank's evaluation in Nepalese economy, in Nepalese economic future counts much. And World Bank's stake from America is so high. It is the American president who appoints, the World Bank president. Now we can imagine if USA is annoyed, if USA is not happy. China officially had said several times, if Nepalese people strongly feel that MCC is beneficial to the country, any foreign agreement is beneficial to the economy and to the people, to the nation, China will have no objection at all. So, similarly, US government have not gone against the Belt and Road Initiative that we have agreed with China, So, we make a guess that China has. This ruling government should table the bill, give enough opportunity to discuss with the parliamentarians. All the parliamentarians can consult with the scholars, with those people who go against it, with those people who are in favor, and use their own brains and use their own political party's decision and then vote for that. If the majority discards this, then fine, this is gone. Politely you go back to US and then tell them, sorry, our parliament couldn't endorse. We had a good intention to table this in the parliament and get it endorsed. Because of the nature of the participation, because of the nature of the coalition partners, we couldn't do it, But they have not done any damn thing like this. This is the problem. This is where the now US officials are worried very much. If they worry, if they take it negatively, we should not take it very lightly. What the hell, they will do it. India will save us or China will save us. At times you should think that we are only the one who could save ourselves, not others. For next couple of years, 5 years at least, 5 to 10 years I would say, it's very difficult to imagine sustainability of Nepalese economy without remittances. But always I have been telling you people in the media that self-sustenance, self-sufficiency is a priority sector that we have undermined for the last several years. Even the basic consumption goods are being imported, there has not been trade facilitation. Like for instance, the number of negative lists that we had when we traded with China has been dramatically narrowed down, but still the export is much lesser than what India we have with India. So we should try to find out what are those binding constraints that Nepalese products have failed to penetrate into Chinese market. Why we have a huge trade deficit with China. One single product like palm oil, we import raw material from third country and add some value in it, export it to India. In our comment several times we told earlier government this is pretty risky, because out of the total trade income this country has, palm oil alone represents more than 26%. This is a huge amount of money. If there was a restriction by India. You remember when we had a trade treaty during Gujarat prime ministerial regime, we had free access to Indian market. There were 5 fundamental projects which went to Indian market without any restrictions. There was no quantitative restrictions. There was no tax tariff at all. So we enjoyed a lot, and most of the factories were established looking at Indian market. But when India seriously thought that their domestic market has been injured, Nepalese produce more products than what they consume and what they are supposed to export to India. This is not imaginable, the amount that we could see. So there has not been much more of value addition in the product they export to India. So they restricted. So they had imposed quantitative restrictions, they had imposed value addition component, so that trade benefit was just gone. So people were worried what will happen tomorrow if India restricts import of Nepalese sort of palm oil. Now we are thankful to Indian government, they have opened up their market, but you have to try to find out for how long. So you try to find out most economically, most competitive in the international market, what are those products that can penetrate into China and that can penetrate into Indian market. Until now, the amount you pay for your export, for your import in raw materials and machineries is most costly, higher than the income you get from your export. Because if you diagnose, if you go categorically, the kind of products we import, the kind of products we export, export value is much less than the cost of import. We made some adjustment on that, number one. And those products which are, there had been some research work done by some international institutions with regards to Nepal's returnees from migrant worker. So more than 70% of the migrant workers who returned back to Nepal didn't want to go back there again, and their preference was agriculture. And 30% preferred to work if there is opportunity available. They prefer to work on the area where they had developed some kind of specialization while working abroad. So 70% didn't want to go back, and their preference was agriculture. So we talk a lot about modernization of agriculture, but until now we have not been able to take farm product into the main market centers. So there has to be collaboration with the private sector, maybe the transportation facilities, maybe some subsidy in the gasoline, in the diesel or petrol, while bringing about consumption goods items, foods. So it will be cost competitive compared to Indian products. There are some areas in Nepal where the products, if they could send it to India, is much more profitable than bringing it back to Nepal. So there is no link in the market. Not only the financial access, market access is another problem. So there are a couple of things that we need to look into these areas from policy perspective. So if we become serious, if there is a political certainty, lot of things can be done easily. There is a hope. Taking care of 30 million Nepali people is not a big deal. Whatever resources we have, whatever potential we have, we are fortunate enough, we have different climatic zones in Nepal's 3 geographically distinct divisions, mountains, hills and Tarai. We have temperate climate, we have, where, the kind of vegetables, fruits you grow in one climate, the kind of cereal grain you grow in another climate. We have different kind of climates in one small country, because of the topographical divisions. So we have not been able to do that either. So there are some scope, there are 7 key sectors to create employment opportunities in this country. We precisely know what sector has employed how much persons until now. In the last 1 decade, I was just going through the statistical information. I found out 1.18% employment generated in last 10 years in the manufacturing sector, which is little more than 350,000 people. Every year we have about 700,000 new entrant in the Nepal's labor market, but in last 10 years in manufacturing sector we could create employment opportunities for only 1.18%. So this is the tragedy. So we exactly know what are those potential sectors in the economy, how many persons are being employed at the moment, what is the scope. So if the government and financial institutions collaborate with private sector, employment can be created. Agricultural sector could be developed. Lot of things can be done. We do have some ideas, so we should discuss.